Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Okay, welcome again to Sufi Ibrahim Krebs's YouTube channel. And we've been going over briefly the lives and the teachings of some of the great Sufis. And today we're going to cover Muhyiddin ibn Al-Arabi, one of the most famous, perhaps second most famous after Jalaluddin Rumi, at least in the Western world. Ibn al-Arabi is known as Muhyiddin, which means the reviver of the deen, of the religion. And he's also known by the Sufis as Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest sheikh. But he's not an easy sheikh to understand. In Damascus, most of the shuyukh discourage their murids from reading Ibn al-Arabi because they say you'll just get confused and you'll think you understood something that you don't understand. Because Ibn al-Arabi is, he's way out there. Now, if I rely, as I've said before, these seminars are intended not as walls, not as screens of entertainment, but as doors, to open doors for you. So we're going to give you some resources about Ibn al-Arabi that you can follow up on. Specifically, 3 different books. Okay, what the first one, and there's a, it looks like this was a painting of Ibn al-Arabi. It's by Stephen Hurtenstein, called The Unlimited Mercifier. Stephen Hurtenstein. If my associate is able, we'll put a link. But we don't want to make it too easy either. So you can just click a link. Keep, when you're listening to these seminars, do what I do. Keep always a pencil and a paper so you can write these things down. I still believe in the written word as written by you, not as written by your keyboard. Stephen Hurtenstein, The Unlimited Mercifier. If you look at the picture that's there, the painting, if that's in any way accurate, Ibn al-Arabi is way out there in the other worlds. The Buddhists have a saying about, I think it's about the Buddha or some of the Buddhists say, gate, gate, para samgate. You know, outside of any of your possible understanding. So don't really think you have understood him right away. Sheikh Abdul Rahman Shakuri in Damascus said, if you can take the first line of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah and understand it properly with it, and understand the grammar of that first line, I'll appoint you as one of my sheikh, one of my shuyukhs, just if you understand the first line of that book. But he used to teach it anyway, out of respect. However, in Damascus, you weren't allowed to publicly teach Ibn al-Arabi. So one of the great experts, probably the greatest expert in the Arabic world, is an Egyptian named Mahmoud Ghurab. I met him once or twice at the meetings he had, but he wasn't allowed to speak in public because it was considered that there could be too much fitna, too much dissidence, too much problems around the understanding of what Ibn al-Arabi said. So the Arabic expert is Mahmoud Ghurab, and we have a lot of Western experts. One of them is the book I pointed out to you by Stephen Hurtenstein. He's a scholar from Oxford. I met him as well. I attended one of their annual meetings of the Ibn al-Arabi Society, which was held at the Worcester College in Oxford. A beautiful place, a beautiful meeting, but I saw they were all people stuck in their minds, full of mind productions, rather than actual spiritual realities. Now, Mahmoud Ghurab claims that Everything Ibn al-Arabi says is from experience. None of this is theoretical. None of it is philosophy. But I think it doesn't hold water, his theory, because if you read some of Ibn al-Arabi, it sounds completely like philosophy. And Sheikh Nu agrees with me on that one. He's also a philosopher. In fact, in his Wikipedia page, it starts off by saying that he was an Andalusian, from Murcia in Andalusia, Arab scholar, mystic, poet, and philosopher. Okay. I think that's correct. I don't know, I haven't seen any of the poetry, but definitely a mystic and a philosopher. So what is actual experience and what is philosophical overlay, I'll let you try to decide, but you probably won't be able to. I can't. Second book that you may want to read, it's probably maybe the best book of the biography, is by someone called Claude Adas. Get out your pencil and paper, write Addas. No links, makes it too easy. Things are too easy for millennials, so they don't work at this stuff. Claude Adas, Addas, The Quest for the Red Sulphur. And the red sulphur is like a symbol of enlightenment. The Rosetta Stone, or there are a lot of things in English that are similar. If you find it, you found the truth. The Quest for the Red Sulphur. Now, Adas, I said him, it's a her actually. Okay, this is another lineage. Most of you probably aren't aware of it. Hadi, do you have any idea where Claude Adas comes from?
She's French.
She's French. Okay, that's a good start.
And her father was also an expert in Ibn al-Arabi.
Yeah, her father was another scholar of Ibn al-Arabi. Do you remember his name?
Some weird name.
Michel Chodkiewicz. For those who like reading in French, there's a lot of, he's published a lot of stuff in French, although, again, he's very, very philosophical. But when I traced it back, and I encourage all of you, when you find something interesting, trace it back to its source. What is the silsila? What is the origin? Okay? So Claude Adas, this book, Michel Chodkiewicz, who's a student of Michel Valsin, French philosophical type, who's a student of René Guénon. The perennialist, the Mariamia, the Schuonians. We may have a lot to say about them at some point. The general principles stay away, but they have made some contributions. So Adas is from the perennialists, ultimately, with all that that implies. But it's a very good book, and there's some genuine insights in there, a lot of information. As intellectuals are good at information, they're just bad at insight and inner vision, but they're great at accumulating data, that holy grail. The holy grail, that's what I want. Like the red sulphur is the holy grail of the intellectual class, is data. That Jung so eloquently denounced. You'll find that quotation in my first book. Reams and reams of data, as if all this information would eventually lead to a true conclusion, which it doesn't. It just gets you more and more confused. Subject for another time. Claude Adas. And last but not least, or maybe last but least, William Chittick. Have you heard of William Chittick? Okay. Met him too. I've traveled a lot. I met him somewhere in New York. He's a professor at SUNY, the University of New York system. Not sure what the S stands for, but anyway, they're the University, UNY, University of New York, and he actually had not a bad presence, but he's another one of those Schuonians, another perennialist. And this book, looks good, but when you get into it, it's all mine productions. So it's probably the least useful of the three books. But those are the three. William Chittick, you can find him on the internet. That's pen and paper in hand, Chittick. Chittick. Okay, so let's go from the books to the personal experience, and then we'll talk more directly about Ibn al-Arabi. So, being a lover of Sufis, in 2007, I went to Damascus, and we rented with my wife of the time and two of our children. We rented an apartment about 100 meters from the tomb of Ibn al-Arabi. The area in Damascus is called Sheikh Muhyiddin. My daughters had some fun experiences when they took taxis and they would say Sheikh Muhyiddin and no one would understand them because they didn't say the shada on the dal. They didn't say Sheikh Muhyiddin. They said Sheikh Muhyiddin. They were never understood. Subject for another time. The precision of the Arabic language. We'll talk a little bit about that shortly. Anyway, Sheikh Muhyiddin is the maqam of Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi. It's where he's buried in Damascus, in the Sahliya area of Damascus, the Sahliya area of Damascus. And I used to go there to pray regularly. And one day I was sitting there in dhikr in front of the tomb, and I fell asleep, and then I had this kind of vision, dream, in which I was writing, which I was already starting to do at the time, and then this hand came out, and it grabbed my arm, my right arm. I was writing, I think from right side, and it was saying, no, you have to start from the other side, from left to right rather than right to left. I'm just thinking, okay, now for the logicians in you, amongst you, this is going to be haram because Arabic is written right to left, so it must be good, and English is written left to right, so it must be bad. But this dream was telling me to write from left to right. I knew it had nothing to do with Arabic or English or any of this, but it had to do with the heart. Right means the rational faculties. The left brain becomes the right hand, which is the rational intellectual faculties, and left refers to the heart. So it was telling me you should approach your communication. I'm still working on this one. Must be 2007, 16 years, 17 years later, I'm still working on this one. But approach your expression from the heart rather than from the mind. I have this bad habit of trying to explain things to people, even things that I understand clearly, but I realize that most people, they don't enjoy being explained to for whatever reason, whether it's pride or closed-minded or whatever. They don't like explanations. So you're better off approaching people with the heart faculty than the rational faculty. That's what I understood from that experience at the tomb of Sheikh Muhyiddin. Sheikh Muhyiddin was born, in terms of dates, we're talking about the 12th century AD, or now it's called CE, Common Era, 1165 to 1240. And he came originally from Andalusia, but when I traveled to Andalusia, I couldn't find the site of where he was born and where he lived. It's a place called Murcia, but I didn't see anything in that area because we traveled around Cordoba, Seville, and that whole area. What's the other place that your father loved?
Petra?
No, that's in Jordan. In Andalusia.
Oh,
Alhambra. Okay, all of that is in Andalusia. Beautiful area, but very little left except some skeletons of buildings. I didn't find any Islamic spirit left there. I was a bit disappointed because I've been led to believe, oh, this is the great place. It was a great place. It's no longer a great place, and the Spanish have, taken it over and purified, what a lousy word. They've tried to cleanse it of anything Islamic. You know, the great mosque of Cordoba is now the small church of Cordoba, and you can a Catholic church, ugly as anything, and you're not allowed to pray in the big mosque. So that's the Spanish mentality. The worst of the colonialists. Maybe the Belgians bypassed them, but English and French were nothing compared to the Spanish when they became colonialists. But that's for another time. Okay, the works that are known, and I just saw that people are doing a lot of work in translating, and the most famous works are the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the openings or the illuminations of Mecca, which he started writing when he went on Hajj and stayed in Mecca for a few years. He did a lot of traveling, by the way. And then the second one is Fusus al-Hikam, which is the explanation of the metaphysical roles of each of the prophets, peace be upon him. And the other one I do recommend people read, if they want to read something of Ibn al-Arabi, read Sufis of Andalusia, which is kind of like Muslim saints and mystics. It's the stories of some of these, really serious Sufis of the time in Andalusia that he visited. Okay. But what I wanted to do most is to emphasize some of his ideas, because Ibn al-Arabi is an ideas man, if you want. So we'll try to cover briefly some of the principal ideas that have come from Ibn al-Arabi. The first thing that's very famous, and I want to read about it, his meeting with Averroes. Averroes is Ibn Rushd in Arabic, and he was one of the most famous Arab philosophers. He did something that he thought was wonderful, and a lot of the Muslim scholars have praised him for it, and I think it was a terrible thing. He brought Aristotle into the Muslim world, and as the Americans like to say, and the rest is history. So he introduced rational, logical Greek philosophy into the Muslim world, which began, in my view, corrupting the Islamic sciences. Now, most of the scholars think it was a wonderful thing and logic is great, but I can see all the places that they get it wrong because of their logic. Oh, okay, which is a segue to another issue that we'll cover maybe a little later, about the rational intellect. Let's make the point now. So Ibn al-Arabi had two ideas that were different from the rest of the Islamic scholars about Islamic fiqh. You know what those ideas are? Okay.
I think he didn't accept the, what's it called? The consensus of anybody besides the Sahabas.
For those who have studied fiqh, there are four pillars of fiqh, right? Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, which means consensus, and Qiyas, which means analogical reasoning, extensions of the text via logic. And Ibn al-Arabi, and I give him full credit for this, he refused Ijma. He said the only consensus that's valid is the consensus of the Sahabas, because their ideas were supervised and controlled by the Prophet, peace be upon him. So their consensus is valid. Any other consensus after that time is just a consensus of mind productions. Totally right. And Qiyas he rejected outright, saying this is analogical reasoning, subject to human error. Sheikh Nazim would have called it mind productions. It can't be a basis for our Islamic rulings, these kind of reasoned conclusions. Okay, so he was unique in that sense. In other words, he was promoting experience over thinking, which is a kind of radical thought even nowadays, even in the Western world, to prioritize experiential knowledge over rational, intellectual, conceptual knowledge. But it's one of the themes of my teaching, always. The inner way, the way of perception and insight rather than the way of thought and abstraction. Okay, so a very interesting thing happened when he met with the philosopher Ibn Averroes. His father sent him to meet this philosopher, and the story goes as follows. I'll see. One day I went to Cordoba, in Arabic Kurtuba, to visit the Qadi. So on top of it, he was a judge, and judges are people who use their rational intellect, overuse. Abdul Walid ibn Rushd. He wanted to meet me personally because of what he had been told concerning what God had revealed to me in my retreat, for he showed great astonishment. So again, Ibn al-Arabi has experiential knowledge, Ibn Rushd has intellectual abstract knowledge. My father, who was one of his friends of Ibn Rushd, sent me to him on the pretext of doing some error or other, but really in order for me to meet him. At the time I was still a boy without any hair on my face. When I entered, he rose from his place, greeting me with great warmth and honor. He embraced me and said, "Yes." This is like the discussions I have with Hadi sometimes. "Yes," he said. To which I replied, "Yes." He was even more pleased. Okay, nothing is being said. You have to figure it out. Because I had understood him. Then I became aware of what had given him pleasure. So the yes was not really a yes. I will explain. And said to him, "No." At this, consternation gripped him. The color went out of his cheeks, and he seemed to doubt his own thought. See, this is someone, as opposed to a lot of the Muslims we meet nowadays, who actually listens. Because this young kid is bringing the truth into the domain of his thought. So he said, it's not only yes. You'll see what we're talking about. He asked me, "What kind of solution have you found through divine unveiling, kashf, and illumination? Is it identical with what we have reached through speculative thought?" At least he knew where he stood. He understood that his conclusions were based on speculation and abstraction, and Ibn al-Arabi's were based on experience. And then Ibn al-Arabi replied, "Yes and no." Whoa. Between the yes and the no, spirits take wing from their matter, and necks are separated from their bodies. Ibn Rushd turned pale, started to tremble, and murmured the phrase, "Wala hawla wala quwwata illa billah," for he knew what I had alluded to. Okay? And here, what they're referring to, and I didn't get it right away either, so don't feel bad, is a question asked in Surah 75, when Allah says to the non-believers, "I created you from dust, can I not recreate you from your bones on the day of judgment? Can I not reconstitute you if I created you originally?" So Ibn Rushd is saying yes, Allah said it, and Ibn al-Arabi is saying yes and no. So what is the no? And let's see if we can, without taking too long. So the yes-no conversation centers on how to understand the resurrection. What is a question of the body or only of the soul? One more general and fundamental point stands between Ibn Rushd and Ibn Arabi, the gulf between two modes of inquiry, the philosophical and the mystical. It is clear that for Ibn al-Arabi, the mystical way is more complete and more encompassing and involves a deeper perception than intellect. So the no, this is a very deep subject. The no is that, yes, Allah will recreate you, Allah will revive you, revive your soul, but no refers to some aspect of the body is not going to be revived. Now, why is this important? This will, for those of you who studied Islam for a while, you'll realize that there are some narratives that they just don't add up. For example, and I've thought of this, I'm sure a lot of thinking people have thought of this. How does this work? On the day of judgment, your soul your body comes out of the tomb, it's reconstituted, and your soul joins with it, and then you're sent to heaven or hell in your body? Doesn't make sense. Anyone who has any sense of heaven and hell on the other side knows that it's not a place of material, carnal existence. Your body doesn't go to heaven or hell, for that matter. This subject also comes up with the Mirage, and there's a debate about it. Did he go by his body or by his soul?
Does it matter?
Well, it matters in terms of your overall conception about what's happening. So the body can't go to heaven. It just doesn't add up. Okay, there is something called the spiritual body. You may have a form in heaven and you may not. But your body, as you know, it can't go to heaven. It's just not a place of that kind of materiality. So in that sense, the resurrection is a no, in the sense that there's a mystery, and Ibn al-Arabi goes into this all the time. There's a mystery. So even if you're reconstituted with your body wa kullu man alayha faniyan, everything is destroyed. So your body has to be destroyed, even if it's resurrected. Anyway, this is a complex subject, but for those of you who have been puzzled by it, as I've been for quite a while, you know, when they argue that the Prophet, peace be upon him, went on the Miraj, he went in his body, it's impossible. Doesn't happen. He might have went in some form of spiritual body or in his soul, but the body can't go to heaven. It's not a place of that level of vibration. Okay, so this is where Ibn al-Arabi introduces the idea of no, it's not like you think it is. Okay, and obviously Ibn Rushd got this thing that kind of, it just turned his world upside down. God forbid that should happen to the ulama of our days, but it just turned his world upside down by this inner mysterious, beyond gate parasam gate, beyond human understanding revelation that Ibn al-Arabi had. Okay. So that's the meeting between abstraction and actual, what the philosophers call phenomenology, experiential reality. But that's still not the point that's best known about Ibn al-Arabi. What's best known about Ibn al-Arabi is the concept,
the Muhammadan reality?
No, there's also, he says he's the Khatam of the Awliya of the Muhammadan Awliya. Okay, Khatam Awliya. But that's another issue. But the issue that provoked the most controversy of Ibn al-Arabi's ideas is the Wahadat al-Wujud.
Oh, right.
Now, the Wahadat al-Wujud that later people, even Sufis like Ahmed Sir Hindi, denounced, created a big stir. How could this be? Okay, so what does it mean Wahadat al-Wujud? Wahadat al-Wujud means the oneness of existence. Okay, and so it appears that Ibn al-Arabi didn't actually use that term, but that his successor, who was his stepson, Sadr ad-Din Qunawi, Qunawi, for those who want to follow it up, he was the one who came up with this concept. He said this summarizes Ibn al-Arabi's thinking. Wahadat al-Wujud. There's only one existence. And then people like Ahmed Sir Hindi and many of the scholars, how could this be? There's Allah, and then there's the creator, and then there's the creation. So there's already two existences. So it's a conundrum. Now, the Ibn al-Arabi and the people following him tried to explain it, but actually if you want to try to understand the deeper meaning, I think you'll find it much easier if you read Advaita Vedanta, because the Hindus, mystics of Advaita Vedanta, came to that same conclusion. There's one existence. Except they had one advantage over Ibn al-Arabi and the Sufis, and the advantage was their language. Because in Sanskrit you have more precise terms for these kinds of inner states of consciousness than you have in Arabic. So this is heretical for Muslims, but Arabic has some weaknesses to it, actually. It's a great language, and it's obviously the appropriate language for this revelation, but it's not always the best language for inner states. And one of the things I realized early on in thinking about this, Wahadat al-Wujud, is one of the problems with the Arabic language is that it's concrete and material in a certain way, so that there's no real word for consciousness in Arabic. And someone I know who studied it, he came up with some word, and if you look at the Webster's the Oxford Dictionary, there's a word, but it's a word that you won't run into anywhere. It's not in the Quran, not in the Hadith, not in, the scholarly language. So it's not a concept that's common in the Arabic world, the concept of consciousness. But it resolves a lot of problems. Now in Sanskrit it's called chit. Those who understand, Satchidananda, one of the gurus I once met. Sat is existence, chit is consciousness, ananda is bliss. So if you get to the deepest level of consciousness, of the existence of consciousness, you're in bliss. Okay. But they have the word for consciousness, chit. If Ibn al-Arabi, now this is speculation, had a word for consciousness and said wahadat al-chit, wahadat al whatever it would be, consciousness, I think a lot of the problems would have been resolved, actually. Yes, we have consciousness, Allah has consciousness, our consciousness comes from Allah's consciousness, so there's no real problem with the wahadat, the oneness. Only if you look in a material way, Allah is one entity and His creation is another entity. You can't get to oneness that way. Okay, it's a bit of a subtle argument, but I think it's really important. Now, Adas does say something very interesting, which if you're a black and white thinker or an all or none thinker, you'll have to put plugs in your ears here, because this is a commentary on Arabic, which I think is important. Okay. The word wujud, wahadat al-wujud, provides one illustration of this kind of problem, which is in fact far from unique to the corpus of Ibn al-Arabi's writings, although in his case it could be particularly annoying, not so much annoying, but confusing. This one word, wujud, can occur in the space of just a few lines with a disarming multiplicity of meanings. If you have a good Arabic-English dictionary, wujud can mean many different things,
Okay,
right?
right?
Arabic words are very wide in their expansiveness. So, as a verbal noun from wajada, to find, so it can be finding, as a reference for the created universe in opposition to its creator, so the creation, wujud can refer to, an expression of the concept of existence, wujud, and is applicable in a strict sense to being, okay? The one thing it doesn't say is consciousness, okay? Because that concept is not there. This polysemy, this is the first time I ran into this, and it's helpful, or variety of meanings of one single word is one of the most perilous privileges of Arabic, and without any doubt is at least partly responsible for the misinterpretations, not only by Ibn al-Arabi's opponents, but also by some of his defenders. So the Arabic words are very wide in their meanings, which can predispose to misunderstanding. And I think that's a lot of the. So if you want to really penetrate, this is my heretical suggestion, but if you want to really understand Wahadat al-Wujud, read the Advaita Vedantas, because they describe it very nicely in a way that's not really specific to any religious context. The one that I looked at recently, I was going to read, but it'll be too long. Maybe at one point we'll do a talk on Advaita Vedanta versus Sufism. But I came across this Krishna Menon Atmananda, and he was one of the big Advaita Vedantas, and he taught John Klein, who taught Francis Lucille, who taught Rupert Spira, who's now one of the big corrupt heroes of the Advaita Vedantas, because they don't have Sharia. They only have the Wahadat al-Wujud, but they don't have the Sharia. So a lot of them, Muji recently, from Jamaica, in Portugal, and Rupert Spira, and who knows how many others have used this deep understanding of the absolute in a way to, in the relative, be super corrupt and exploitative. But that's a whole other issue. Okay, so if you want to understand Wahadat al-Wujud, read the legitimate Advaita Vedantas, and Krishna Menon is one of them. Ramana Maharshi is another one. Papaji, there's a lot of Nisargadatta. There's a lot of them out there, and they have a good explanation, which is completely consistent with the Haqqaiq of Islam. Okay, so I think we'll leave it at that. There's a lot of other things. There's the whole concept of Insan al-Kamil, the perfect man, which again is a problem of Arabic because there's no such thing as a perfect man. But Kamil in Arabic can also mean complete. So there are men, including all the prophets, peace be upon them, who are complete in the sense that they deal with the world and they deal with the afterlife and they deal with our connection with Allah. So they're Insan al-Kamil. They're complete, but they're not perfect. Because you just read the Quran, all of the prophets, they made mistakes at certain points in time. Not sinful in their intention, but they made mistakes. So if you translate it as the perfect man, you miss the point. It's really the complete man. Okay, so with that, I think I've covered some of the essential concepts. There's a lot more, of course, to be understood. I don't think for people starting on the way, I don't think Ibn al-Arabi is a good place to start. The people I saw in Oxford who were trying to approach Ibn al-Arabi through the Oxfordian intellectual tradition were just people who are lost. You're better off just learning the Sharia and starting to practice there if you want to really ultimately understand Ibn al-Arabi. So Ibn al-Arabi is probably not your first door into the Haqqaiq, into the truths, the reality of Sufism. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Al-Fatiha. So inshallah next week we'll do a short talk on, not to forget the ladies, and Arabi al-Basra, another great Sufi ascetic, and we'll talk a little bit about her, and then we'll have completed 5 of the most well-known Sufis, and at a later stage there's so many other great ones, Abu Hassan al-Shadali and Shah Bahauddin Naqshband and Abdul Qadir Jilani. There's so much. Junaid, we covered already. We introduced him already. But Junaid is, he talks more about the sober aspect, and I think as Westerners, we're more interested in the ecstatic. Give us bliss, O Allah. Give us the higher states of Sufism so we can have some of this spiritual enjoyment as we give up more and more of our worldly enjoyment. Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rabbil Ameen. Al-Fatiha. Okay.